We've been planning this launch conference for nearly a year. It's always sort of remarkable to see when these things come together. I'd like to thank Mr. Secretary, Mr. President, the working group at CUHK, everyone who is involved, all of the speakers and the honored guests for being here. It is a distinct pleasure and a privilege that I've had to work with the faculty and the administration of CUHK, with my other colleagues from the Hastings Center, to help them in their efforts to launch this wonderful new Center for Bioethics and to put together this conference. I hope you're going to enjoy the next couple of days. Many of you I recognize in the audience and are sort of deeply involved in bioethics and undoubtedly know the Hastings Center. Some of you may not. The Hastings Center was established 45 years ago, so the sort of first independent center of bioethics. It was a center of bioethics before there was something called bioethics. It was started by a philosopher named Dan Callahan and a psychiatrist named Will Galen, who are still on our board. So we are one of the oldest centers in bioethics, and so it's really a wonderful thing to be here to help launch the world's newest center in bioethics. Now, as President Sung mentioned in his remarks, Hong Kong is rich in research and lots of talent, right? There are people who are experts in health policy and health services management, in clinical and biomedical research, and so what you may be asking, does bioethics add to all of this? Certainly these other disciplines ask important questions about how health systems work. They answer descriptive questions. They try to explain how health systems work and how biological systems work. Sometimes when they're bold, they try to predict how they work. But bioethics gives us an opportunity to reflect on what our goals ought to be. What sort of health system should we try to create? What new technologies should we develop and should we use them? Because of course, our capacity to develop technologies does not tell us that we ought to use them. As my dear friend and colleague Eric Parents, who you will hear from tomorrow, often says, bioethics allows us to ask the oldest questions in the context of the newest technologies, and I would add, given the themes of the conference, some of the newest demographic changes that societies face. So who are we? What do we owe each other? Are the sorts of questions that bioethics tries to address. So one question that we had when CUHK made this remarkable decision to create a new center for bioethics is how could this center best contribute to this ongoing dialogue? And one of the answers is reflected in the overarching theme and the title of the launch conference, which is a focus on global cities. Because one of the ways in which the CUHK Center can take advantage and offer a great deal, I think, to the conversation in bioethics is by taking advantage of the fact that it is in Hong Kong, one of the world's great global cities. It is a center for finance, for information technology, for trade, for culture, and the arts, and quite importantly, for biomedical research and medicine, with many great academic medical centers and hospitals. And as such, like many global cities, it has a number of advantages, but faces important challenges. One of those challenges is rapid population aging. There is a convergence of megatrends, and you're going to hear more from this from my colleague Victor Rodwin in the first keynote today. There is not only rapid urbanization throughout the globe, but rapid population aging. And population aging is happening perhaps fastest here in Asia at a remarkable pace compared to the old world. Victor and I often study France, and France took nearly 2 centuries to go from a position where 7% of its population was 60 and over to one in which 14% of its population is over. There are many cities and countries throughout Asia that will do that in about a decade. And fairly soon, many of our countries will have populations in which 20% or more of the population is 65 and over. Here in Hong Kong, I know through studies with my colleague Jean Wu, who helped co-organize this conference, there are neighborhoods in which you are approaching that demographic profile already. So that raises important ethical questions. How do we design our health systems to address the foreseeable challenges associated with population aging? To what extent does this place pressure on social norms, issues of filial piety, intergenerational equity? And we're going to be taking on some of those questions today and beginning a dialogue with you. Of course, while Hong Kong is dealing with population aging, because it is a great center for biomedical research and for academic medicine and for healthcare, it is also, like other global cities, faced with the challenge of how and when to incorporate some of the newest technologies. With a revolution in genetics, in emerging technologies in neuroscience, the question becomes, when should we use these technologies and how? How do we make them available? When should we limit their use? And so the second day of the conference will shift gears a bit and begin to explore those questions. And then nicely, I think at the end, we're going to bring them together a bit with two really interesting panels dealing with the issue of Alzheimer's disease and dementia. Right, with new opportunities and new capability to detect Alzheimer's earlier. The question is, when should we use those tests, and how should the health system respond to the availability of those tests? And while we're developing new diagnostic tests and new treatments for Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia, how should we best organize systems to care for patients who are already experiencing those health problems? So I'm looking forward to the next 2 days. I'm going to keep my remarks brief. You have your agenda in front of you. Today we have two wonderful keynote talks and 4 panels. The first keynote by Victor Rodwin will address broad issues and challenges faced by health systems in global cities. We will then have 2 panels before lunch that further explore some of the questions raised by aging in global cities. We'll have a lunch and then a final panel. Each of the panels will have 2 to 3 presenters who will keep their remarks relatively brief, 10 to 12 minutes, even though we have an hour-long session. The hope is that we're not just going to talk at you, but we'll actually engage you in some conversation. And so we have tried to structure this so that the first half of each panel will involve some hopefully provocative remarks that will stimulate discussion, and that we hope you will join in, raise questions, and join the conversation with us. We'll have a second keynote in the afternoon and a final panel. And then tomorrow will be a bit shorter day with a keynote not to be missed by my friend Eric, followed by 4 additional panels exploring whole genome sequencing and the ethics of whole genome sequencing, biobanking, and the last 2 panels dealing with the ethics of the diagnosis and treatment of Alzheimer's disease. So with that, I would like to thank you for being here, and I look forward to working with you and speaking with you over the next 2 days. Thank you very much.